This is Blue Left, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the underrepresented Democratic voices in Tennessee, working tirelessly to bring progressive change to the volunteer state. Here's your host, Peggy Kingsbury.
That's right. From grassroots organizers to community leaders, from urban centers to rural towns, we highlight the diverse perspectives and powerful voices that often go unheard. Join us as we lift up the blue wave and shine a light on a path toward a more inclusive and equitable Tennessee. Again, I'm Peggy Kingsbury, your host, and this is Blue Lift, where every voice matters. Well, friends, I am always excited about my guests, but today I have someone with us that I think you're really going to enjoy getting to know a little more about. We have Joshua Patrick here. And Joshua's going to talk to us about some really fun topics and probably answer some questions some of you have had along the way about what it's like to work for a political campaign, how those jobs formulate, what they actually do, what happens when the job is over, and then we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk some about Russia. And I'm going to tell you right now why we're going to be switching those gears. Joshua Patrick has a degree in political science with a minor in German from Belmont University. And when he was doing those studies, he spent some time in Germany and Denmark, and we might talk a little bit about that. Then Joshua went on to get a master's degree in international relations with a specialization in U.S. foreign policy and a regional focus in Europe and Russia from George Washington University. So that's a big old fat bunch of education Joshua brings to the table today.
Yes.
Currently, Joshua is the newly elected Democratic State Executive Committeeman, and he represents Senate District 27, which is here in Tennessee. And for those of you not in Tennessee, I think all state parties, both Republican and Democrat, have what they call a committee men and women, and those are people who sort of represent districts of their party's members in one centralized organization. And so Joshua, and in Tennessee, that is an elected position, and I suspect it is in probably most states. And so Joshua ran for that in Senate District 27 here in Tennessee, and he filled that role. So interestingly, Joshua is the state executive committee man for our Governor Bill Lee's district that he lives in. Different party, same district. He has spent time working for various campaigns as a staffer and a political operative. He does a lot of work in voter outreach and field strategy. He is a dedicated foreign policy wonk, and he really loves to look at global issues and has a passion for advancing progressive values both domestically and abroad. He's also a real emerging leader in our party here in Tennessee, and so we are so excited to have you with us today, Joshua.
Thank you.
So let's dig right in. I want to talk to you a little bit about working on campaigns. I think that's an interesting topic, and most people, myself included, don't really understand all that goes into starting a campaign and then hiring people to work for you. Now, if you're going to run for school board, for example, wherever listeners are, you have a school board, right? If you're going to run for that, you probably don't need to hire a staff. Some do. Some will hire kind of like a campaign manager to help them. But anything sort of above that level, most people nowadays are hiring a campaign staff. So let's talk about a race for something like a representative to the U.S. Senate. That's kind of a big job somebody would be running for. So when someone decides to run for something like that, Joshua, who is the first person they usually hire? What position would they hold?
Normally, that would be the campaign manager.
Okay. And then the campaign manager has to hire a bunch of other people.
Yes.
So who all might be on that staff?
So normally you could have a political director, you could have a field director, you could have finance associate or associates. It's really expansive, and every campaign is different. And even if it's a Senate race in Tennessee, it may look differently in a Senate race in Massachusetts or Virginia. Okay.
So each candidate can kind of determine what sort of team they need to surround themselves with.
Yes.
So now what would a political team member do?
So a political director could work with facing the public, such as how we're going to face messaging.
Okay. But then around messaging and marketing, they often will hire outside firms to do that too,
Yes.
right? I mean, it's very expensive to run a campaign if you do it well,
It is.
because, people don't work for nothing. So what was the first time you worked for a campaign, and what did you do?
So the first time I worked for a campaign was nearly 10 years ago, and I was a field organizer. I simply did some basic volunteer management, and I would tell volunteers where to go. I would try and sign them up for stuff such as knocking on doors or phone banking. And then when I'm not doing that, I'd be knocking on doors and making phone calls myself.
Okay, so doing it yourself. So I think what's important for a lot of us to know is that when you see a candidate that you are supporting, no matter what party that is, and you go on their website and there's a click here to volunteer button, then that's where the field organizer gets that name and figures out something for that person to do.
It can. Yeah.
Okay. Now, kind of going backwards a little bit, and I probably should have asked this first, but let's go backwards a little bit. Why and how and when did you become so interested in politics?
So it all started when I was 5.
5. It's funny. We've had someone else sit here and tell us about getting interested in politics as a very, very young kid. So it's not unheard of, but tell us about your experience.
Yeah. So when I was in kindergarten, we had this whole job fair day, and everyone wanted their different little jobs. People became firefighters or school teachers or nurses. But I was the kid that wanted to be the mayor. And I ran a successful campaign of nap times and snack times, and I won my election.
So you were mayor of your kindergarten class.
Yes.
That's funny. And so that's truly when you sort of got interested in politics.
Yes. I was always into civil service and caring about the public.
Okay. And then when you got ready to, did you hold any other offices?
In high school, I was elected as a class representative my sophomore year. And then in college and undergrad, I was elected to the Student Government Association as a representative.
So you've been a candidate before. When you decided to go to college, how did you land on a major of political science?
Well, I didn't know what I wanted to do at first, but I wanted to work in politics. And at the time, my first thought was, well, the run-of-the-mill general degree in politics is political science. So I figured I would start there.
Okay. And then after that, you actually did work on some campaigns, right?
Yes.
Continuing to do that. And then you switched gears and you got your master's degree in all sorts of foreign relation things. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. So it actually started in undergrad. I took an international affairs class, and at the time, Crimea happened and the invasion in Ukraine, Euromaidan. And I was like, whoa, this is really interesting. There's a lot here. I had to do a term paper on it, and I fell in love with the subject. And that led to my love of international politics, and it's why I ended up getting my master's degree in it.
Okay. So Crimea Crimea doesn't exist anymore, right?
No, it still has, and it's existed for well over 2,000 years.
Okay. And who invaded Crimea? You'll have to refresh my memory. Russia. That's what I thought. No, it wasn't Putin at the time, right?
No.
Was it Putin at the time?
Putin has been in charge of Russia in some shape or form since 2000.
Okay, since 2000. See, I'm so old, I remember Gorbachev. That's yeah, we're different generations. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. So this is not the first time the region has been through something like what's going on right now. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about Ukraine and all of that, and then we're going to come back to more localized issues. But for someone who, you speak a little Russian, I happen to know that.
Я немного говорю по-русски.
I have no idea what you just said, but you sound like, it's like The Americans, right? You remember that show? I love that show.
Amazing show.
Oh, yeah. So true. And I just wonder, are there people around us that are really Russian spies?
Well, actually, the show was based on real life.
Yeah, I know. I read that, and I was stunned when I read that. So when we talk about Russia and Ukraine and we see what is going on right now, obviously it's incredibly disturbing to think that just a sovereign country can be sitting there and all of a sudden they're being invaded. And there are a lot of Russian-speaking people in Ukraine, right? And there are a lot of Russians, people who are, I guess, native Russians living in Ukraine.
Yes.
And it's funny because I heard somebody the other day say something, I don't know if it was online or on television, that, Ukraine, I mean, you can tell that it's really supposed to be part of Russia because so many of the people speak Russian. And I'm thinking, oh, there are a lot of people who speak English, and so are we all supposed to be like Canada? And that did not make any sense to me at all. Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit about the invasion. Were you really stunned when that happened?
Not at all.
And tell us why.
Well, for starters, Russia has been involved with Ukraine for well over 300 years. It's gone back to the Russian Empire. In fact, it's a little small thing, but you hear a lot of people call Ukraine the Ukraine. It's just Ukraine. When people say the Ukraine, they're referring to it as like a colony, which is how Russia used to see Ukraine.
Okay.
And, well, the reason why there's Russians in Ukraine, for the most part, is because, A, it's been several hundred years of occupation, but mainly in the regions of the Donbas region and Crimea, which is eastern and southern Ukraine. And part of the reason of that was because of Stalin. Stalin, he hated Ukrainians, and he did mass genocide across Europe in what was the Soviet Union. And part of his plan was to kill Ukrainians off. And it wasn't just Ukrainians. It was Ukrainians, Latvians, Lithuanians, Estonians, and gradually replace them with Russians so that he could, in his own words, to breed them out.
And so he was really going after any country that was contiguous to what we know as Russia.
Yes.
To bring them into the fold.
Yes. But he had an exceptional hatred for Ukrainians.
And what was that? Do you know why? I mean, is there ever anything said about why?
I'm sure there is, but I don't know.
And so keep telling us more about why you're not surprised at Putin's actions.
I mean, for years now, Russia has been involved with Ukrainian politics, Georgian politics. I mean, all the Eastern European countries, it meddles in their elections, which, where have we heard that before?
Yeah. Sounds familiar.
And part of that is to so that they could keep control, or at least a semblance of control, and to have a border buffer state between them and the West.
Okay.
Part of that goes back to World War II. Many of the Russians feel like the West gave up on Russia and let the Nazis go full steam ahead into Russia. And their whole argument is, hey, we need a border so that y'all can stay away.
Okay. So then when Putin took the action of actually going in and taking Ukraine, do you think that his goal was to take the whole of Ukraine, or was it to just take part of it back?
I mean,
well, I say back. It never really was theirs, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So I think originally he thought he could steamroll Ukraine. He didn't think they were as organized as he thought he did. If you look at the Ukrainian military pre-2014, you're going to think it was like the Soviet army. I mean, they were using Soviet hand-me-downs. Now it's a modern militarized force.
Right.
That's been completely trained up and built up by the West, which is great. But he thought he could send shock troopers into Kyiv, into Kharkiv, and the other major cities, such as Odessa, and just steamroll the country and then force them to capitulate in 3 or 4 days. And that is not what happened at all.
No. No. How do you know what the estimate is right now on Russian casualties?
Oh, it's hit over 1 million soldiers.
Yeah.
It has to have been.
It is a lot.
Yeah.
It is a lot. And yet we hear, and we don't know if it's true, but we hear that the Russian people are still supportive of this action.
So, yes. So the Russian propaganda machine is a machine that is 100 years strong. I mean, like Russia today, it has its foundings from Pravda, the
Right.
state central newspaper during the Soviet Union's times.
Right.
And propaganda is a powerful tool. And unfortunately, I mean, there's plenty of Russians who are aware of what's going on. There's a reason why so many young men in particular have tried to flee the country, especially to countries like Georgia, to try and get asylum so they can avoid military service, because they know it's a bloodbath, and they know that they're not going there for the glory of Russia and to show the world how great Russia is. They're going there because Vladimir Putin and the oligarchs that back him are wanting control and power for like the oil reserves and like the Black Sea and Crimea.
Right. So in Russia, the typical Russian resident, if they want to like flip on the TV and watch the news, they essentially just have one place to get the news from, right?
You got propaganda.
And it's controlled by the state.
Yeah, even social media now. I mean, they don't use Facebook. They don't really use Instagram. They're not really allowed to use that. They have their own messenger systems. Like there's one popular version of like WhatsApp that they call Telegram, which in the United States has been used popularly with white supremacist groups,
Yes.
Christian nationalist groups, and
Yes.
so on.
And so that's what they use for their media type stuff.
Yes, especially if they want to skirt around like even government media. They'll
Yeah.
use like programs like Telegram to try and find
Uh-huh.
out what's going on.
So, with your knowledge and your education in this area, and then I know you're keenly interested in it and you stay abreast of things, how do you think this is going to play out?
Well, I'm very, very worried about the upcoming presidency of Donald Trump. I mean, he is not a fan of Zelensky. Elon Musk, not a fan. The people who back Trump, such as even Joe Rogan, for instance, said Zelensky
Yeah.
the other day.
Yeah.
And, I'm worried for Ukraine's future. However, it's going to really, really rely on what the Americans do. I mean, Trump will probably try to sue for peace. I mean, he tried to pose himself as an anti-war candidate, which he's not, but that's a whole different subject.
Do you think he'll try to broker an agreement between Putin and Zelensky so that Zelensky will give up some land? Because I think Zelensky has said you're not getting anything.
Oh, yeah. No, Zelensky has practically said you can take our land from our cold, dead hands, and which I believe is the proper response to Vladimir Putin.
Exactly.
We've given multiple red lines to Putin over the years, especially like in Syria several years ago, and we did nothing.
Yeah,
Or we
yeah.
did like, embargoes and all that other crap, stuff that only affects the population and not really the people at the top.
Right. And I actually saw a report the other day that all of the financial levers that we have pushed around, trying to punish, quote unquote, Russia has really made the Russian economy stronger in very odd ways. And it was a very convoluted answer to how that happened, but actually their economy is doing okay, even though we've put all of these levers down. And I guess the only people that it really does hurt is some of the oligarchs whose yachts we've taken and that kind of stuff. They get a little miffed about that. But so I guess many of us are, we know right now that what President Biden's administration is doing is sending some additional arms to Russia and to Ukraine and allowing them to use things that we previously had not allowed them to use.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what those are called. Do you remember?
It's like certain missiles and technical defense stuff that I should know, but I don't pay attention to that side of things because I care more about the people and the demographic aspect of like the war and like that this is a ongoing genocide.
Oh, it's
in Ukraine.
horrible. Yeah. And it just keeps on. And and when I heard that we were, giving them some new technology to use and whatnot in conjunction with some European countries, I thought, that's good and bad. The good thing about it is, I guess the hope is that we can send them enough stuff here in the last couple of months that we have with this administration. And I guess in a dream world, you would think, okay, they're just going to beat Russia back and it'll be over. now, though, that Trump's been elected, I don't see Putin backing down because he thinks that as soon as Trump comes into office, he will, I guess, just withdraw all aid from Ukraine and tell Zelensky, you better just give up some land or we're just going to let them have their way with you.
Yeah. And like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have like talked about how, hey, we want this plan specifically of like giving up Crimea to Russia, giving up the Donbass region like Luhansk and Donetsk. And, you know, that's a non-starter. This was Ukrainian territory since the fall of the Soviet Union, but more importantly, this has been Ukrainian territory for years, decades. I mean, it's sovereign Ukraine.
Yeah, and it's just bizarre to think, but I mean, really, the only analogy that we could possibly have is that Canada decides for some reason to just, take Michigan.
That'd be very sad.
Which actually Trump might like that to happen, but if Canada just decided, all right, we just want part of the U.S. land, we're just going. I mean, they speak English like we do. They're probably Canadians, so we're just going to come down there and we're going to take it and start killing people. And I mean, just the absurdity of it, to think you're just living your life one day, going to work, sending your kids to school, getting your groceries, and then boom, all these bombs start dropping and you're being invaded. It's hard for us to imagine that, but that's what's exactly happened to the Ukrainian people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's horridly pitiful. So do you think that Trump and Putin are already planning how this thing would play out?
I wouldn't say they're planning together. I mean, Putin's playing Trump for a sucker. He wants Trump to be president because Trump is his sucker.
Yeah.
He is an idiot. And he is a useful idiot. And it's why after Trump's election, I mean, Putin went and had Melania's nudes posted on Russian social media.
I saw that. And
Russian propaganda sites.
Why do you think he did that?
Just to spite him for fun, because he knew that this was a pivotal election for the United States. And regardless of who's going to win, he wants to mess with us. Russia knows that they're our enemy. Like, it's tit for tat.
That really surprised me when he did that, because I thought, well, now he's just trying to make Trump mad at him. And I didn't, their relationship is something that I don't think any of us could possibly try to understand. But when I saw that he had his news organizations post those pictures of Melania nude all over Russia, I was stunned by that. I just thought I thought they were going to be friendly with one another, but apparently that's not going to happen.
Trump is a useful tool until that tool is no longer needed.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, Putin is obviously extremely scary. And I wonder, I guess he's going to retain leadership until he dies. Is that what it's looking like?
To quote his predecessor, Boris Yeltsin, who was the first, elected non-Soviet official of Russia.
Right.
In 2000, when Putin won, he went up to Putin and got caught on a hot mic, patting him on the back, shaking his hand and saying, "Take good care of Russia for me." Yeah.
So,
I mean, it's pretty typical. Like, Russian leaders
right.
tend to rule until they die or they are ousted by someone else who's going to be in charge for like 20, 30, 40 years.
Whether or not they're actually part of a, quote, election, unquote.
Yeah.
The Russian version of an election.
Yeah. Democracy doesn't exist in Russia. It's an authoritarian regime.
Yeah. Plainly. Well, that's all very interesting and disturbing at the same time. And I wonder if Putin will then sort of regroup his military after this is over. And I'm going to make my prediction. I suspect that he probably will end up getting a little bit of that Ukrainian territory. But then I wonder if he's going to stop. Who's he going for next?
Yeah. So we kind of have an inkling for this to begin with. For several years now, the Baltic states have been the target of Russia. Russia has done war games on their side of the border, bordering Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And these war games are done with mass amounts of troops. I mean, like tens of thousands of troops. And it's over a square foot area of the size of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. And, they were doing the same thing in Russia's border with Ukraine. It's only a matter of time. Now, the only difference is Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, they're NATO members.
Right.
In
right.
which, if Russia attacks NATO, Article 5 goes into effect, and you attack one NATO member, you're attacking all, which could lead to World War III. But do we really want to find that out? Do we really want to see if that's all a bluff or,
Right.
if there's a war? I mean,
And why was Ukraine not a NATO member?
So part of it goes back to the fall of the Soviet Union. Ukraine was trying to forge its own path. Didn't have the best leaders in charge to begin with when it became a free independent country. I think to this day, the biggest mistake that the United States ever did with Ukraine, and as well as Ukraine itself, was brokering the deal with Russia to return its nuclear weapons. At the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, guess which country had the most amount of nuclear warheads in the world?
I would guess them.
Yeah, it wasn't Russia. It was Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
Ukraine, Kazakhstan, all the outlying parts of what was the Soviet Union is where all the nuclear missiles were. But Ukraine had an exceptionally large stockpile. And so President Bill Clinton, and he's talked about this, he regrets having done this deal. Part of the new treaty between Ukraine and Russia for eternal peace between the two was, we will return every nuclear warhead to Russia if you will never invade us or take ownership over us again, which they broke that treaty.
Wow. And so in order to get into NATO, your country has to have a certain level of military readiness and a certain level of leadership and whatnot, and Ukraine just hadn't quite risen to that level.
Part of that, I think a big part of it is the worry. Well, it's the votes needed. With NATO, it's universal acceptance. Everyone has to vote yes.
Oh, is that right? For a
Yeah.
country to get in, everybody has to vote yes.
Yeah, everyone has to ratify it. It's why it took so long for Sweden to get in, because Hungary was sitting on their ass about it, and I believe Turkey as well. And
So some countries wouldn't vote for it because Vlad told them not to, basically.
essentially, yeah. I mean, Hungary's run by Viktor Orban,
Right,
and he is
right.
a Putin crony.
Right. Wow. So Ukraine does not have that NATO protection, obviously. I mean, I did know that. I just didn't really know. I didn't really understand why. But the Baltic states do. And so that may slow Putin down a little bit.
It may. I mean, where is the red line?
Exactly.
I mean, does Putin really want to risk that and
Right.
cross the border and risk literal World War III?
Right.
Or does he keep on messing with countries like Georgia or Ukraine
That are not NATO members.
Yeah, and try and pluck stuff from them. Well, Georgia's a different case, but yeah.
Well, and of course, Trump has even said before that we should withdraw from NATO.
Yeah, and that would be a gross mistake. I think if we did that, it would be probably the largest foreign policy disaster in U.S. history.
And I don't see that happening. Maybe I'm a Pollyanna, but I still do believe in some of the checks and balances that are there. And I just don't see the Congress allowing that to happen.
I mean, if we leave NATO, it will make appeasement to Hitler, be nothing.
Right,
I mean, it
right.
will be a mistake.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, again, maybe I'm a Pollyanna, but I've got to think that's something that wouldn't happen. So let's switch gears completely. And I want to talk to you about the most recent election,
Mm-hmm.
but in broad general terms, not necessarily candidate specific. You are a millennial.
I am.
We're talking generations, and your host here is a proud boomer, big time boomer. I don't know. Some of you listening may remember when I think it was either New Zealand or Australian official was trying to throw some shade on somebody with a little age. Yeah, New Zealand, and she said, "Okay, boomer."
Yeah, that was Chloe Swarbrick
Yeah.
of the Green Party, and
Yeah.
she's a big fan of her.
Yeah, so you have a good memory for that. I'll just remember thinking, oh, is it a bad thing to be a boomer? I guess now it is because they're making fun of us. But one of the good things about being a boomer is you generally have a lot of your own employees and they can't make fun of you. So,
Oh, well, you don't
Yeah.
employ me, so.
no, I don't. So you're going to make fun of me. I'm your ride out of here, by the way.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
But anyway, so let's talk about from a millennial perspective, because I believe a lot of people are wondering, and possibly on both sides of the aisle, but I would say mainly on the Democratic side of the aisle, messaging. When politicians are trying to message to millennials, I mean, what happened? What happened? What messages were getting through and what messages were falling flat?
So I think, like, in specific cases, I think the Harris campaign did a good job in messaging towards millennials and Gen Z. However, do I think that their messaging was overall great?
Well, obviously not.
Yeah, but like towards millennial and Gen Z, we're very active on social media. There was so much content that was thrown our way via social media. There was like Project Coconut Tree on Instagram and Twitter.
And all that brat stuff, which we
Memes.
boomers didn't really know what that was about. But
Yeah,
I did Google it.
Yeah, we love Charlie X.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
But yeah, it's, a lot of us were influenced by influencers.
But a lot of your generation just did not vote.
Yeah.
And what's that about?
Well, many of us are disgruntled. We're angry. And this is not me calling specifically boomers, but, many in the older generations hold on to power.
Oh, I totally agree with that.
And they do not want to share it. They do not uplift younger voices. They do not do anything to prepare us to lead for when we take over, which now we're the largest voting bloc in the country.
Right. And so you believe that in this last election that one of the things that happened is that many in your generation felt ignored.
I mean, I think that's part of it, right? Like, we care about Social Security, but like, that's not an issue that directly affects us. That's going to be an issue that's going to affect us in like
So
40 years.
what is an issue that speaks to your generation?
I think healthcare. I myself don't have healthcare. I've not had healthcare for several years, and it's too expensive. Even with a job, it is too expensive. We are the only developed nation in the world to not have a nationalized healthcare system. Why?
That's interesting because, in the messaging, you're telling me that that's important to your generation. And of course, I believe that. I'm not of your generation, so I'm going to take you at your word. And I can understand how that's a big issue. But I did not really see a whole lot of talk about that.
Yeah. The first candidate to really bring that front and center in modern American politics was Bernie Sanders. We even saw it again in 2020 during the debate stage.
Right.
It was Bernie and Elizabeth Warren. And for context, like I did do some work on Elizabeth Warren's presidential campaign, so I'm a little bit jaded because
Yeah.
that's who I wanted to win in 2020, but that didn't happen. But during the debate, it was asked, which of you would support a nationalized healthcare system? And of course, the first person to raise their hand was Senator Elizabeth Warren. She shot her hand up so fast, I think she was going to fly up into the sky. And then the other was Bernie Sanders.
Right.
Those are issues that we care about. We're poor.
That's interesting. And I can see that because I know that from talking to some members of your generation, excuse me, there's a generation between the baby boomers and the millennials. Is there?
Yeah, Gen X.
Gen X, yeah. So I've talked to Gen X and millennials, and I'm familiar with some, from having employees and whatnot, that it is shockingly expensive to, even if you have a group policy offered to you at your job, to put your entire family on that policy. Mm-hmm. It's hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month to do that.
Yeah.
And it's prohibitive in many cases. So it's that's very, very important. But now that we're sitting here talking about this, it's really, I'm just thinking, wow, I wonder why candidates didn't talk more about that, because that would have been a hook for your generation. That would have been something important. And of course, you and I both know, because we both somewhat study politics, you much more than myself, but my thing is always follow the money.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons we don't have national health care in this country is because of lobbies who lobby for organizations that make a whole lot of money off our current health care system.
Yes. Especially like some of the biggest employers in Williamson County, the health insurance industry.
That's right. Where Joshua and I live is Williamson County, and it's sort of become a hub for healthcare companies, probably because the Frist family started HCA, which is just probably still one of the biggest. But yeah, there's a lot of money flowing around this county that has to do with the healthcare industry. And so their lobbying firms nationwide are very, very big, and pharmaceuticals, et cetera. Is there another issue that really speaks to your generation?
I think education reform is something that we all very, very deeply care about.
So talk to me about that. What would a millennial say needs to be done to our education system?
It needs to be free.
And you're talking free for college?
Yes.
Okay. And there are some countries that have free college. Germany is one, I believe.
Practically a good portion of the world.
Yeah, yeah. And so if it was free, do you think more people would go to college?
Oh, yeah. Oh, 100%.
And how about trade schools? How does your generation feel about all of that?
I think, at least here in Williamson County, like trade schools are looked at in a positive light. I know when I was going through the public school system in high school, like that was brought up. We had plenty of people who were not going to college, and it was encouraged, go to a trade school, learn a specific trade. And I know several people that went and did that.
Yeah, and as we all know, excuse me, electricians and plumbers do really well.
Oh, yes, they do.
Yeah.
Especially HVAC repairmen.
Yeah, oh
which
yeah.
I had a math teacher that was an HVAC repairman as a side gig, and he eventually quit his teaching job
To do that full time.
because it made more money.
Oh, how about that? Wow. And I can completely understand that. So if we had free college, do you think then some people's fear is that if we had free college, much like, vouchers, which is a big deal all over the country actually right now, but if we had free college and that meant that it was being subsidized or paid for by the government would have more control over what goes on in the colleges. Is that a fear?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, maybe if that happened under a Trump administration, but I think it's safe to assume that education or getting more people educated is not a priority for Donald Trump.
No, probably not. But it would sort of concern me that if we did do that, and then let's say free college happens in the next decade, I'll be too old to really care about it at that point. I'll just be wondering what the flavor of pudding is today at the rest home. But let's just say that happened. And, one administration was in and they wanted certain things done in colleges, and then the next one comes in and they want a different thing taught at colleges. I can see that being messy in a uniquely American way.
I mean, if you kind of think about it already, colleges across the country have to follow certain standards to begin with. For
Right.
like getting your degrees, People, for the most part, getting a nursing degree have to follow the same stuff across the board because that's just how it is.
Right.
Same
Some
thing in political
standardization.
science.
But one can now major in African American studies in many colleges.
Yeah.
And I can see some administrations may do away with that if the government's paying for it. Or women's studies.
That's true.
I mean, maybe I'm being an alarmist, but those I would never have thought a decade ago that I would be sitting here thinking something like that could happen. But now I completely think something like that could happen.
I mean, you can go, well, let's look at Hungary, for instance, who does have a quasi system of nationalized college.
Yeah, Trump's other big buddy.
Yeah.
I say Vic and Vlad are his two best friends.
I know for a fact you can study women's studies from the University of Hungary in Budapest.
Okay, so
I had a friend that did that.
Okay, so they have not cracked down on that sort of stuff yet.
Yeah, and maybe that's like a hyper, specific case. But
Right,
I mean,
right.
Hungary is pretty controlling
Yes,
as a
yes.
very, very conservative society and government. But like, you can still go to college and get a degree in women's studies. And the United States is a lot more freer in that. And a reminder, like, we do have our First Amendment rights, and whether some Republicans like it or not, the Bill of Rights can't be changed.
Right.
And, you can't really regulate a college for degrees or classes on that over subject matter, which could be classified as freedom of expression or speech.
Right, right. Well, I admire your optimism. Perhaps I've gotten myself a bit jaded, but I do admire that millennial optimism. So, as we move forward, what would your advice be to politicians at the state, local level, or also the national level, of how to reach your generation and make sure that we get you to the polls and then that they can get your vote?
So I think the number one issue for millennials and Gen Z, especially if you're of college age, is to expanding voter access. Tennessee is one of the most restrictive voter access states in the country. If you go and get registered to vote today in Tennessee, you have to show up in person to go and vote for your first time, which can be difficult if, let's say, you're from Memphis and you decide to go to college in Knoxville.
Right.
It means you got to go drive back to go and vote, which is pretty scummy.
That is very bizarre because, you're eligible to vote when you're 18. And some people, like I was 17 when I graduated high school, so I was off at college when I became eligible to vote. And so it is a real hindrance to think that you've got to do that your first time, which means you've got to somehow get from your college. Let's say you're going to UCLA and you're from Nashville. You got to get from California to Nashville during early voting hours, voting days, to vote that first time because you have to vote that first time in person.
Yeah, and that's if you vote during early voting. And I think it's a unique case here because I've done campaigns in both Tennessee, Virginia, DC, Maryland, and here specifically, there is an abnormally high amount of people, even Democrats, who just want to go vote on election day.
Right.
And I don't see that any different for younger people too. If that's the kind of household they've grown up with their entire lives, probably more likely than not going to go vote on election day.
Right. So that's one thing that you would like to see candidates speak to and maybe try to change, are those restrictions in Tennessee so that young voters have an easier time to vote their first time and they'll continue to vote.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you look at states like North Carolina, which didn't go our way in the election, at least for the presidential, but statewide. Democrats did very well. And I'm very, very, very happy that their candidates won the statewide races for governor and attorney general. But you look at colleges like University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, I saw specific posts where they were doing stuff on college campuses, from voting to registering students to go and vote. And here we don't really have that.
Yeah, we don't. I think the reasons,
and it may not be legal.
It may not be,
Yeah.
and I think the reasons are somewhat obvious. I mean, I guess the hunch is from our supermajority that young people are not going to vote their way, so they just as soon see them not vote.
Yeah.
I mean, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I think that's probably something they've thought through. What can you think of another issue that would be something that would speak to millennials?
The rent is too damn high.
Yes, the rent is too damn high. And I don't know how we bring it down. I don't really know. I mean, we don't want to get in a rent control situation like they have in New York in some areas, or used to have. I think that's phasing out. But, I don't really know what we can do to bring housing prices down. But for those listeners who are not in the Middle Tennessee area, let me tell you, it is shocking. The median house price in Williamson County is $1 million. So
Yep.
that means half of the houses in this county are over that and half are under that. But the median is $1 million.
Oh, yeah. Like, I can't afford to live in the county that I live in, which
Yeah.
sucks.
I mean, if we had not bought our house some years ago, we wouldn't be able to afford to live in the house that we live in. If it was for sale today, we wouldn't pay that for it.
Yeah.
You know, I hope somebody will someday, but it won't be us. So when we talk about, your generation and probably the one generation younger than yours, and we talk about the high cost of living, which I think is affecting a lot of people everywhere, and my listeners are in various places. What would a politician say or do to convince you all that they were actually going to do something to bring rent down?
I mean, like, this is like finance stuff that isn't my specialty. There's tons and tons of people that are more educated than me on this, but like, we got to work on like getting housing credits. We got to do everything we can to encourage first time home buyers to like get the money and be able to do that, but also they get like a special tax credit to actually afford getting these things.
Right.
I mean, for my generation and Gen Z, we're not going to be able to own a home. It's just, that's the reality of it. We're not going to have our little home with our little white picket fence. I mean, we might have the golden retriever, but like...
Well, it's very sad that your generation really sits around and thinks like that you just don't see in today's atmosphere that you'll ever be able to own a home, at least not here in this wealthy area where we are. And there are lots of areas around the country like this area.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I used to live in D.C. I lived in Arlington, but I like to claim that I lived in D.C. But, I left during practically the height of COVID, and I couldn't afford to live there anymore. And even doing the work that I was doing with campaigns, right. I could not afford to live there.
Right.
And I thought, well, I'll move back to Middle Tennessee and try and get involved with campaigns there and try and financially readjust. However, I didn't save money. Since moving back from DC, I mean, it's the same cost of living,
right,
essentially. I have not been able to save a dang penny out of it. Like, I'm in debt.
Right.
And I don't like being in debt. I budget. I plan every little thing. Now I have like a little bit of a party fund, but that's, what can I do? Like, everything's so expensive. When I first got my cats 2 years ago, the cans that I'd get from Publix would cost like 50 cents, and they're now nearly $1.
So that's a big increase.
Yeah. And like, for what? Like,
well, so that your cats can have their best food.
Oh, listen, they get chum.
They get the best.
Yeah.
Well, and so that's an interesting thing that you bring up, and it sort of goes into talking about the different ways people work these days. My generation, Joshua, so I've been affiliated with the same company for 39 years.
Wow.
And I know people in your generation always say, wow, and they're like, I can't imagine. But of course, it's a major corporation, so I was able to live in different states. So it's almost like I would have new and different jobs. I didn't get bored, but I was affiliated with the same company. So the idea that I could build up a history and a savings and a 401k and all of that, it's just normal. That's just what my generation did. That's what we experienced. But I'm finding now that so many people piece together a living with this and that and the other, or they do like something like you're doing. I mean, your passion is politics and you love working with campaigns, but it's like being an actor, right? You're always looking for the next job.
Unfortunately, yes. Unless you win.
Unless you win, and then maybe you can go work for their administration until they don't get reelected. I mean, you're still sort of, there's always sort of one foot like looking for the next job.
Yes.
And I find that really interesting, and it's not just people who love to work in politics, but a lot of younger people I see do that kind of thing.
Well, I mean, also, like, we have this, like, whole thing where you pull up your own bootstraps and, like, make a name for yourself in this country. Like, that is the culture. But on top of that, compared to your generation with mine, when it comes to working for a major corporation, often we feel like we're getting burned and churned. Like, they hire us, they run us through the mill, and when they're done, they throw us out, cut hours, etc. And so we never get the chance to do that. And also, we have so many major corporations today that, they're looking to hire people for entry-level jobs and then underpay us, with squalor.
Right.
It's
right. And I would agree with that. I would agree that corporate America is known for just working people to the bone, and then they just think, well, I'll just get somebody else to fill your spot.
Yeah.
And if you can be in charge of your own destiny, that seems to be the thing that your generation and the one after yours really wants. That they want some control of what they're going to be doing with their day.
Yeah.
And I do not think that younger generations are lazy. So I want to preface what I'm going to say with saying that. But I will say that you are more likely to see a boomer accepting of a situation where we have to work 50 hours a week because we just didn't come up during a time when there was not even the phrase self-care. We didn't. That was not what we did. We gave it all to the company.
Was that before labor regulations?
Some, but it's just what you did, I can remember so many times when I would be finishing up work at home on my own time, but just doing it because, I wanted to move ahead. And some of that was in my generation, if you, as a woman, you had to work, and do 3 times the work of the men in order to even get yourself recognized. But I'm not sad that sort of culture seems to be waning out. That does not bother me at all because I think Americans are known for sort of overworking ourselves. And then it's like a bell curve. The quality of the work gets poor after a while.
Yeah.
And it's better to come back refreshed. Now, I do think there are some European countries that are a little bit much on the free time, but but maybe that's the boomer in me talking. So it's interesting that we've uncovered a couple of issues that are really important to you millennials that didn't get mentioned very much during the election. And the healthcare thing is important. So, I hope moving forward, if you continue to work on campaigns, maybe you can help with some messaging around that because it is a big, big deal. In your generation, you all are, I don't know, what ages are the millennials? 27 to...
It's like 28 to, I think, going on 40.
Yeah. So, you guys are going to start having some health problems. It's just going to happen.
Listen,
and
working on campaigns for 10 years, I already got bad knees and everything.
So,
I'm falling apart.
Healthcare is going to be more and more important to you. When you're in your early 20s, you don't care, physical, who gets that, but you're going to find out real fast as you start getting into your 30s that things can happen. So that's an interesting thing that we've learned today. What would your advice be to someone who wants to get a career going in politics, working for campaigns? How would one get started doing that?
Well, to circle back to what you're talking about, work hours and everything, I will say, if you want to work in politics and you want to work in campaigns, it's not a 40-hour work week.
No, I've seen that. I've seen how hard campaign workers work during the campaign. And then I know that all of you are sort of like, whew, and you just need to take a break after it's over. So, yeah, that is true. I'd forgotten about that. You're right about that.
Normally that last month of any campaign, and it doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, that last month of a campaign, regardless of how big or small it is stressful. You're probably if you're doing your job right, you're probably doing 70 to 80 hours a week. You're going gray, and you're just looking forward to election day so you can just have a nice rest and maybe a cocktail. But
yeah, and then it's time to, get back up and start looking for the next job. Yeah. So if someone wanted to start doing that, if they're super interested in politics and campaigns and have never done anything like that, how would you suggest they get started?
So I would start, and depending on your party, we're Democrats, reach out to your local county party. That's always the first start you can do. reach out to them. If you're a young person, like you're in, I don't know, a Gen Z or a millennial, like look up to see if there's a local Young Dems chapter in your county or region.
And get involved volunteering that way.
Yeah. I mean, it's even as simple if it's the campaign season, like go on the candidate's website that you like and press volunteer.
Push that button.
Yeah, it's as simple as that. Press the volunteer button, fill it out, and actually show up. You know, do that. There's a lot of amazing people that you meet on campaigns.
Right.
And it leads to connections. Every campaign I have ever worked on has always led me to my next job.
Oh, how about that? That's good advice.
Yeah.
That's good advice for someone. So actually push the button to get involved, do some volunteer work at first, make sure you really like it, and then you can start looking for actual jobs in campaigns. Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. What's your prediction as a millennial and as someone who knows a lot about politics and keeps track of things? What's your prediction about how the next 4 years are going to go?
Ooh, this is where my millennial optimism is going to go away. I think it's going to be pretty bad. But I don't think things are going to change much in Tennessee. I think what we see in Tennessee is what we're going to see on the national scale. But there will be significant resistance. I mean, we have solid blue states like California or Massachusetts, New York, etc. But like, expect the politics you see in Tennessee to be amplified on the national scale.
Okay. What does your generation think of immigration issues?
I mean...
And I don't mean not necessarily your echo chamber, because I know what you think of them, but I mean, I know that you spend more time with people in your generation, certainly, than I do. What are they saying about all of these things?
I mean, like, Gen Z men specifically are leaning conservative and very hard conservative. And the number one issue that we have learned from this election was the border, immigration. And I think, I think the Democratic Party is going to have to really look at messaging and, where do we go from here when it comes to the border and immigration as a whole, as a system. And I mean, for me, like, I'm positive. I support immigration. I have many friends who are immigrants, but like, the administration is going to try and deport people. They're going to fail. I mean, like, it is expensive to deport someone, and they want to deport millions upon millions of people. It is going to end badly. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to piss off a lot of people.
And it's probably going to hurt our economy.
Oh, yeah.
A great deal.
Oh, 100%.
But what you're saying is really interesting. So what you're saying is to the Gen Z voters, and I know this is true because I've read probably some of the same stats that you have, the males specifically, the border issue is huge to them. Now, whether or not that is because they have been convinced by various talking heads that it should be super important, it does not matter. It really doesn't matter. What matters is it is important to them. So if we Democrats ever think, or progressives, whether it's independents or progressives, Democrats, whatnot, ever want to make a foothold back with those voters, they need to address that issue.
100%.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and even a lot of my friends in my generation, when we talk about it, we look at it in terms of we've got to do something, but my generation tends to look at it in terms of geopolitical issues. Not, oh my gosh, all these people are coming here, but why are all these people coming here? Which is in the root of where they're coming from, not anything about us. So, when I look at the issue, I think, well, it's very hard for us to solve other countries' problems so their people want to stay, It becomes, that's kind of what my friends and I sit around and talk about is how can we keep so many people from wanting to come here?
Yeah. I mean, like, that's never worked out. Like, isolationism has never worked out in the United States.
But it seems that that's the path that some are wanting to take right now, is to isolate us in many ways. Don't sell us your stuff. Don't send us your people. Leave us alone.
And then we learn the hard way.
Right.
I mean, we tried to do this in the 1800s, well, specifically in the late 1800s with like the Chinese migrant ban, I mean, like, we've tried this before. It has always been a failure.
History is a wonderful teacher, isn't it?
It is, and people really need to read up on it and heed it.
Well, we're making a lot of history now, and I just wonder, in the next generations that I won't be around for, you may be around, to see how this is all going to shake out and what the history books are going to say about this time in America's history.
I'm sure historians 100 years from now are going to be like, what the hell were they on?
Yeah, and I think it's a test of our democracy, which I think will prevail. But I do think she's being tested. She's being tested right now.
She is.
Yeah. Well, this has been fun. If somebody wanted to reach out to you to say, hey, man, I'd love to get involved in some political races. Politics is fun to me. I would love to try to have a career in that. How would they reach Joshua Patrick?
And so I'm most active on Instagram. I would say Twitter, but I recently decided to jump the sinking ship.
Yes, and you're a Blue Sky member now.
Yes, as of like 2 days ago.
So if somebody wanted to reach you on Insta, how would they do that?
Joshua the Wanderer.
Okay, Joshua the Wanderer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you would be able to give them some advice about getting started in politics and that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to meet with people for coffee or like have a phone call.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been interesting. I like learning about different generations and what they're thinking and what issues are important to them. And I hope that you will definitely find the next gig pretty soon and continue to try to change the world, because that's what I think it's about. I think that's what you're really trying to do. And I see that important to your generation. You all want to make a difference in things that you do.
Well, you never know. There may be an election coming up. So
there could be. There's an election coming up somewhere, and you're going to be looking for a job with those candidates.
Or maybe I'm running.
Or maybe you're running. Who knows? That's right. That's right. You learn the ropes, and then you run yourself.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, stay in touch with us, Joshua, and I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. We are going to take a really short break for the holidays, but Blue Lift's not going anywhere. We'll be back. I appreciate everyone listening. I would love for you to like, share, and comment on this podcast, and reach out to me if you have any questions or know someone that would make a great guest. Everybody have a great day. Talk to you later.